Pay attention to the man sitting on a flattened cardboard box. He is almost invisible, a statue of forgotten promises melting into the concrete landscape of a Las Vegas afternoon. His face is a roadmap of hardship, etched with lines of exhaustion and sun-scorched desperation. His hair is matted, his beard untrimmed, and his eyes, when they occasionally lift from the cracked pavement, hold a vacant stare that looks through the shimmering heat haze, through the crowds of tourists, and into a past that no one here can see. The date is July 18th, 2018. The temperature is climbing past 110 degrees. For the man on the box, whose name is Thomas Miller, this day is no different from the last, or the one before that. It is another rotation of the sun, in a life ground, down to survival. But he is less than 60 seconds away from an encounter that will shatter the crushing monotony of his existence. He doesn't know it yet, but a force of nature, a man as famous for his fury as for his fortune, is about to bring his world to a screeching halt. He has 60 seconds before his life changes. This is not just a story about a celebrity's act of kindness, a fleeting moment of charity captured for public consumption. This is the story of the invisible wounds of war, of the systemic abandonment that follows our heroes home from the battlefield. It is a story about the labyrinth of bureaucracy designed to help, but which so often crushes. And, most importantly, it is a story of what happens when one man, himself forged in the fires of public disgrace and personal redemption, decides to stop his $250,000 car and truly see the soldier hidden inside the shell of a forgotten man. To understand what happened on that blistering Las Vegas street, you first have to understand who Sergeant Thomas Miller was before the cardboard box became his home. He wasn't born into this life. He was driven into it. He was from a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where the flag flies on every porch and Friday night football is a religion. Tommy, as his mother called him, was a good kid. Not a straight A student, but loyal, hardworking, and fiercely protective of his younger sister. He was the kind of boy who fixed his own bicycle, mowed the neighbor's lawn for a few extra dollars, and dreamed of a life bigger than the one his town could offer. That dream took shape in the black smoke and twisted steel of September 11th, 2001. Thomas was a senior in high school. He watched the towers fall on a small television in his history class, and a quiet, cold fury settled deep within him. It was a feeling shared by a generation. For Thomas, it was not a question of if he would enlist, but when. Against his mother's tearful pleas, he walked into the Army recruitment office the week after his 18th birthday. He saw it as his duty. He saw it as the only honorable response to an attack on his home. He excelled in the structured, disciplined world of the military. The chaos of his teenage mind found order in the drills, the routines, the clear chain of command. He became a man in the Army. He trained as an infantryman, and by 2004, he was deployed to Iraq. He served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He was good at his job. He was a leader, earning the rank of sergeant. He was the guy you wanted watching your back in a firefight, the steady hand who could calm a panicked private, the one who always checked the gear twice. He saw things that no person should ever have to see. He lost friends. He held them as they bled out in the sand. He walked through villages that smelled of death and cordite. He carried the weight of it all, but he carried it well, or so it seemed. Back home, he had a life waiting for him. He had married his high school sweetheart, Sarah, during a brief leave. They had a son, Leo, born while he was on his 2nd tour. Photos of Leo were his lifeline. They were tucked inside his helmet, taped to the dashboard of his Humvee. The thought of them was the anchor that kept him sane in the madness of war. He dreamed of coming home for good, of teaching Leo how to fish, of growing old with Sarah, of finally having the quiet, normal life he had fought so hard to protect. But the war came home with him. It didn't arrive in a coffin draped in a flag. It crept in silently, a stowaway in his own mind. It was there in the way he flinched at the sound of a car backfiring. It was there in the way he had to sit with his back to the wall in restaurants. It was there in the nightmares that ripped him from sleep, drenched in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs as the phantom sounds of explosions echoed in his ears. His family didn't understand. How could they? Sarah would try to hold him, to comfort him, but he would pull away, a stranger in his own home. He felt disconnected, isolated. The vibrant colors of his life back home seemed dull and meaningless compared to the hyper-vivid, high-stakes reality he had just left. He loved his wife, and he adored his son, but a chasm had opened between them, a wound that no one could see. He started drinking, not for fun, but to quiet the noise in his head, to numb the memories, to find a few hours of dreamless sleep. This is the vulnerability that the system is supposed to catch. This is the point where intervention is critical. But for Thomas, like for so many others, the help was a mirage. He made appointments with the Department of Veterans Affairs. He filled out endless forms, his hands sometimes shaking too much to write clearly. He sat in sterile waiting rooms for hours, surrounded by other men with the same haunted look in their eyes. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and a possible traumatic brain injury from an IED blast that had rattled his skull years earlier. He was given prescriptions. He was put on a waiting list for therapy that was 6 months long. 6 months. For a man drowning, 6 months is an eternity. The drinking got worse. The distance between him and Sarah grew into a canyon. Fights became more frequent, whispered arguments escalating into shouting matches that made Leo cry. He lost his job at a local warehouse after showing up late one too many times, his eyes bloodshot and his breath smelling of whiskey. Sarah finally gave him an ultimatum. Get real help, or get out. He tried. He really did. But the system was a bureaucratic beast, slow and indifferent. He felt like he was screaming for help in a soundproof room. One day, he came home, and Sarah's bags were packed. She couldn't watch him self-destruct anymore. She couldn't raise their son in that environment. It was the final blow. The anchor was gone. He drifted. He stayed on friends' couches for a while, but his drinking and his dark moods wore out his welcome. He was proud. He was a sergeant in the United States Army. He refused to be a burden. So, he left. He took what little money he had and started driving, with no destination in mind. He was running from the ghosts, from the failure, from the man he had become. The road eventually led him to Las Vegas, a city of dazzling lights and deep shadows, a perfect place to get lost. And he did. The money ran out. The car was sold for a pittance. He spent a few weeks in and out of shelters, but the chaos and the danger there were too much for his frayed nerves. He eventually found a strange sort of peace in the anonymity of the street. He was just another faceless, homeless man. No one knew he was a decorated sergeant. No one knew he had a son named Leo. No one knew he was a hero. He was just a problem to be ignored. Now, let's introduce the other player in this story. He arrives not as a man, but as a machine. A black Lamborghini Aventador, a low-slung predator of a car, growling at the traffic light. Behind the wheel sits Michael Gerard Tyson. To the world, he is Iron Mike, the baddest man on the planet, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a figure of immense power, wealth, and terrifying ferocity. His public persona was built on a foundation of brutal knockouts, controversy, and excess. He was the man with the face tattoo, the lisp that could curdle into a menacing threat, the man who bit another man's ear in the ring. He was a walking headline, a symbol of both incredible athletic achievement and spectacular personal collapse. His life was a public spectacle of rage, prison, bankruptcy, and tragedy. On paper, he is the last person you would expect to be an agent of compassion. But that is the old Mike Tyson. That is the caricature. Beneath that surface, a different man had been slowly, painfully emerging. The Mike Tyson of 2018 was not the same man who terrified the world in the 1990s. This was a man in his 50s, a man who had been through the crucible and come out the other side humbled, reflective, and startlingly self-aware. He had publicly battled his addictions, spoken with raw honesty about his mental health struggles, and grieved the tragic loss of his young daughter. He had found a measure of peace in family, in his one-man show where he laid his soul bare, and in a newfound spirituality. The rage was still there, he would admit, but it was a banked fire now, not a consuming inferno. Crucially, his own journey through the depths of public scorn and personal despair had given him a unique and profound gift: empathy. He knew what it was like to be at the bottom. He knew what it was like for the world to see you as a monster, a punchline, a failure. He knew what it was like to feel completely and utterly alone, even when surrounded by people. He had learned to see the pain in others because he was so intimately familiar with his own. And that is the man driving the Lamborghini on this sweltering July afternoon, not the monster, the survivor. Let's return to the timeline. On the morning of July 18th, Thomas Miller woke up before sunrise on his piece of cardboard behind a dumpster. His routine was simple. He would make his way to a public restroom to splash water on his face, then find his corner, his spot. It was on a busy intersection with a long traffic light, maximizing his exposure to idling cars. He didn't have a cup out. He had a sign, written in black marker on a salvaged piece of cardboard. It didn't ask for money. It said, "Homeless veteran, anything helps." It was his last shred of dignity, a quiet statement of fact. Meanwhile, miles away in his gated community, Mike Tyson's day began. Perhaps it was a workout in his home gym, a business call about his burgeoning cannabis company, a conversation with his wife. His world was one of schedules, appointments, and comfort. Two men living in the same city, but on different planets. Their paths were not supposed to cross. The architecture of society is designed to keep the world of the Lamborghini and the world of the cardboard box entirely separate. But today, that architecture would fail. Tyson got into his car to run an errand. He drove through the manicured streets of his neighborhood and onto the public thoroughfares, merging into the river of everyday traffic. He was just another driver, albeit one in a car that turned heads everywhere it went. He approached the intersection where Thomas Miller sat. The light turned red. The Lamborghini, with its engine rumbling like a caged animal, pulled to a stop in the lane closest to the curb, closest to Thomas. Most drivers in this situation do the same thing. They stare straight ahead. They check their phones. They turn up the radio. They do anything to avoid making eye contact, to avoid acknowledging the uncomfortable reality sitting just a few feet away. But Mike Tyson looked. He saw the man. And then he saw the sign. Homeless veteran. Something shifted. For Tyson, a man who has always spoken with reverence about warriors, about discipline, about fighting, those two words were not just a plea for help. They were an indictment. This was a soldier, a man who had been through the fire, just as he had, but in a far more noble and selfless cause. And he was here, on a corner, broken. The window of the Lamborghini whispered down. The air-conditioned chill from the car washed over Thomas, a brief, shocking respite from the oppressive heat. He looked up, squinting into the dark interior of the car. He saw the famous face, the tattoo, the unmistakable features of Mike Tyson. For a moment, he thought the heat was making him hallucinate. Then the voice, that famous, high-pitched, surprisingly gentle voice, cut through the traffic noise. "Hey, soldier, what happened to you?" It wasn't a question of pity. It was a question of genuine curiosity. Direct, unflinching. Thomas was so stunned he could barely speak. He stammered, "Long story." Tyson nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. He wasn't looking at a homeless man. He was looking at a person. He was reading the story etched on his face. He reached into his console, pulled out a thick wad of cash, and held it out the window. "This is for you," he said. "Go get yourself a hot meal. Get a hotel room for a week. Take a shower. Get some rest." Thomas stared at the money. It was more cash than he had held in over a year. His hands trembled as he reached out to take it. But Tyson didn't let go immediately. He held onto the bills and onto Thomas's gaze. "But that's not all," Tyson said. "This is just for now. What's your name?" "Thomas Miller, sir." The sir was automatic, a reflex from a life he thought he had left behind. "Give me your information, Thomas Miller," Tyson said, passing him a pen and a piece of paper. "I have people. We're going to verify your service. And if you are who you say you are, I'm going to help you. I have a ranch. We have work. You're a soldier. You deserve better than this." Tears welled up in Thomas Miller's eyes. They streamed down his dirty face, cutting clean paths through the grime. It wasn't the money. It was the words. It was the look in Tyson's eyes. It was the fact that someone had finally, truly seen him. Someone had called him a soldier again. Someone had acknowledged his worth. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, sobbing. The light turned green. Horns started honking behind the Lamborghini. Tyson gave Thomas a firm nod. "Be strong, soldier," he said, and the window slid up. The black car accelerated away, disappearing into the flow of traffic, leaving Thomas Miller on the curb, clutching a fistful of hope and a promise. This is the moment that should have happened years earlier, not from a celebrity, but from the system Thomas served. The alarm bells for Thomas Miller's fall were ringing long before he hit the streets of Las Vegas. They rang when he first told a VA doctor about his nightmares. They rang when he missed a follow-up appointment because he was too depressed to get out of bed. They rang when his claim for disability benefits was mired in paperwork, delayed, and then partially denied pending further evidence he was in no state to gather. His initial interactions with the system were a case study in bureaucratic indifference. Imagine being Thomas. You summon every ounce of courage you have left to walk into an office and admit you are broken. You are handed a stack of forms, SF-180 to request your military records, VA Form 21-526, EZ for disability compensation, VA Form 10-10, EZ for health benefits. Each form is a maze of boxes and legalese. You are told to wait. You call a hotline and are put on hold for 45 minutes, only to be told you called the wrong department. You see a doctor for 15 minutes who seems more interested in typing on his computer than listening to your story. This isn't the fault of one evil person. It is the crushing weight of a system overwhelmed and underfunded. It's a system where caseworkers are responsible for hundreds of veterans at a time, where the primary goal becomes processing paperwork, not providing care. Thomas Miller wasn't a person. He was a case number, a file, a statistic in a long line of statistics. The initial response was a slow, grinding process that offered no immediate relief for his acute suffering. He was a man on fire, and they offered him a glass of water to be delivered in 6 to 8 months. The breakthrough, then, was not a piece of forensic evidence. It was an act of human recognition. The interrogation that followed was not held in a police station under harsh lights. It was a series of phone calls. Tyson was true to his word. Within days, someone from his team called Thomas at the motel he had checked into. They didn't interrogate him. They listened. For the first time in years, Thomas told his full story. He talked about his service, his pride, the IED blast, the friends he lost. He talked about Sarah and Leo. He talked about the drinking, the shame, the feeling of being invisible. And they listened. They didn't judge. They didn't interrupt. They just let him speak. This was the therapy he had been denied for so long. While Thomas was unburdening himself, Tyson's team was doing the forensic work. They took his service number and date of birth, and they made the calls. They navigated the very bureaucracy that had crushed Thomas. But they had resources. They had persistence. They had the power of a famous name behind them. Within a week, they had the evidence. They had his official military records. And here is what they found. Sergeant Thomas Miller, honorable discharge, 2 Bronze Stars for valor, a Purple Heart for the injuries sustained in the IED blast. Commendation after commendation from his commanding officers, describing him as a model soldier, a natural leader, a man of courage and integrity. The documents were the artifacts of a noble life, proof of his sacrifice. They were the irrefutable evidence that the man on the corner was not a lazy bum, not a drunk, not a failure. He was a hero who had been wounded, abandoned, and left behind. The autopsy of his civilian life became painfully clear. The cause of death of his old life was not a single event, but a cascade of systemic failures. The primary cause was untreated PTSD and TBI. The contributing factors were a healthcare system ill-equipped for the invisible wounds of modern warfare, a lack of effective transitional support for soldiers re-entering a world that no longer makes sense to them, and a society that thanks veterans for their service with yellow ribbons, but then looks away when that service leaves them broken. The alcohol abuse wasn't a moral failing. It was a symptom, a desperate attempt to self-medicate an unbearable psychological injury. The reckoning that followed was private, not public. There was no courtroom, no jury. The trial was over. The system was guilty. But Mike Tyson was not interested in indicting the system. He was interested in saving the man. The verdict was delivered in the form of a concrete plan. Tyson's organization connected Thomas with a private group that specialized in veteran rehabilitation. They didn't put him on a waiting list. They got him immediate, intensive counseling with a therapist who understood trauma. They helped him begin the slow, arduous process of detoxing from alcohol safely. They didn't just give him a handout, they gave him a hand up. And then came the sentencing, or in this case, the opportunity. Tyson followed through on his second promise. He offered Thomas a job. It wasn't a charity position. Tyson owns a large ranch in California, the Tyson Ranch. It requires work, fences to be mended, grounds to be kept, animals to be cared for. Tyson offered Thomas a job working on the ranch, a place to live on the property, and a purpose. He offered him a return to a life of structure, of physical labor, of being part of a team. He offered him a chance to be useful again, to earn his keep, to rebuild his shattered self-respect. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told. The quiet, unglamorous work of recovery. There was no magic cure. Thomas had good days and bad days. The ghosts of war did not simply vanish. But now, he was not fighting them alone. He had support. He had a purpose. He would wake up in the morning with work to do, not a corner to occupy. He began the painstaking process of reconnecting with his family. He wrote a long letter to Sarah, not making excuses, but explaining his journey. He started talking to his son, Leo, on the phone, his voice clearer and stronger than it had been in years. The story of Mike Tyson and Thomas Miller is not a simple fairy tale. It doesn't mean that one celebrity can solve the crisis of veteran homelessness. For every Thomas Miller who is seen, there are thousands who remain invisible. As of 2018, the year this happened, it was estimated that over 37,000 veterans were experiencing homelessness in the United States on any given night. 37,000 broken heroes. This story is a powerful lesson. It reiterates the theme that our national duty to our soldiers does not end when they take off the uniform. That is when the most difficult part of their service often begins. The human cost of our neglect is staggering, measured in broken families, shattered lives, and forgotten heroes sleeping on our streets. The loss of a man like Thomas Miller to the streets was not just his personal tragedy. It was a national failure. The reclamation of his life was not just his personal victory. It was a testament to the power of a single moment of human connection. And so, we must issue a warning. We must issue a call to awareness. We have been trained by our society to look away. We see a man on a corner with a sign, and we feel a flicker of discomfort, of pity, maybe of annoyance. We create a story in our heads to make it okay to keep driving. He'll probably just use it for drugs. He should just get a job. We judge the circumstance to avoid seeing the person. But what if we chose to see something else? You don't have to be a millionaire in a Lamborghini to make a difference. The lesson from Mike Tyson, the survivor, is not about the money he gave. It is about the dignity he gave. It was the simple act of stopping, of looking a man in the eye and asking, "What happened to you?" It was the act of calling him soldier, of reminding him of the man he once was and the man he could be again. That is a power we all possess. The power of acknowledgement. The power of seeing the humanity in the people we are most encouraged to ignore. The next time you see a person on the side of the road, what will you see? A problem to be avoided or a person with a story? You may not be able to change their life in an instant, but you can, for one brief moment, make them feel seen. And sometimes, for a person who believes they are invisible, being seen is the first step back to being whole. That is the haunting echo of this encounter. The Lamborghini is long gone, but the choice it represents confronts us at intersections every single day.